Hello and welcome to the last episode of our season this winter. I can't believe it's already here.
That's crazy. Yeah,
I know.
Time is a flying.
I know, our ninth season, and wow, that just seems like a lot until I realized that spring makes 10, season 10 for us,
Yeah.
which is a big number. That's a big deal. And we're going to celebrate the heck out of that. Let me tell you, can't wait. So yeah, I really loved this season. I loved it.
Yeah,
I
it
loved
was
our
cool.
little mini series
Me too.
in the middle of it.
Me too.
That was fun to do. And I feel like we want to I feel like every season I need to pick an animal that's put upon.
Yeah, just keep shining a light on the underdogs. Yeah.
That's right. The underdogs.
The little guys that need a little more love.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so we will see you in the spring. We're gonna do another little kind of mini series. So we're gonna go big. I'll just say that. We're gonna go big in the next season. So I'm really excited. That'll be fun. But yeah, I love this season, and we're just so grateful for the incredible guests we were lucky enough to have on the podcast. And our guest today is a beautiful way to end our season talking about animals and nature by focusing on the climate and climate action and climate recovery and healing from an Indigenous perspective, which I believe is really critical going forward, and always has been. But this is a great way to end the season. I love that it's just sort of zooming out onto the bigger perspective, which is very cool. So yes, but before we introduce you all to our guest today, I'd love to ask our listeners if they would be willing to take a super quick and easy action for us, and that is rating us. So if you go to Apple Podcasts and select Kindred, when you scroll down, you'll see a section titled Rate and Review, and you'll see 5 stars. If you would be willing to select the number of stars you feel compares to your love of our work and the amazing guests we get to have on the show, offer a rating. That's a really big deal for us. You can pick 5 stars. We love 5 stars. We love 4 too. We just love
we'll take
rating.
4, but why not just go for 5? Like just light them all up.
Light them all up. Make them all purple, right?
I actually recently had to rate something, and they said, "How was it?" And I usually never like to do that. Just like some service I did or whatever, and I thought I was picking the one that would fill in all the stars, and I picked in the one that was just 1. And then they're like, "Oh, sorry, what could we have done better?" I'm like, "Oh dear, let me go back." And I mean, unless it's terrible, I try to be generous, but I did it the wrong way. And I felt terrible, so I had to redo it. So make sure you don't just do the first one, because that means 1 star.
That's right. Go to the 5th star and it lights them all up, like Jenny's saying. So yes. And the more rates and reviews we get, the more people will ultimately start our podcast. That's just how it kind of goes with Apple podcasts. And I think I timed it. This process takes maybe 15 seconds.
That's if you're pretty bad at technology too.
Well,
I could do it
I
in less
am.
than 15.
So I'm
Same.
like, let me
That's what
add
I'm saying.
5 seconds. Yeah, let me add 10 seconds to that. But
it really is quick.
Exactly.
And everybody says it. And so I think sometimes people tune it out because they're like, yeah, everybody says that. But there's a reason for it. It's not just because we want you to think we're great. It's because it changes the visibility that it gives us. So
that's a really good point. We do ask this because it really, you're exactly right. It actually does make a critical difference for us. So thanks for adding that. That is absolutely true. So thanks everyone for helping us out. All right, let's get to our guest today. We have invited on to speak with us Eriel Dernager, who is president of the organization Indigenous Climate Action, the only all Indigenous-led climate action or climate justice organization in Canada, I believe. Eriel is from the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, located in Treaty 8 territory, otherwise known as the Northern Alberta area, and currently resides in Treaty 6 territory, also known as Edmonton, Canada. So we're heading north to our Canadian friends, everybody. So Deranger's work focuses on Indigenous rights and building intersectional dialogue between Indigenous rights, climate, and justice, and other social justice movements. Eriel is also building a global project adjacent to ICA called the Woven Project. And I just grabbed this quote from the Woven Project, and it is, quote, Woven is a global initiative fighting for climate stability through Indigenous solutions. Believing the protection of our planet is dependent on the protection and advancement of Indigenous rights and sovereignty, Woven supports projects on land defense, conservation, and climate campaigns. So, just little stuff out
No
there.
big deal.
No big deal.
Just pretty small.
Just saving the world, really.
Hmm.
Saving our Mother Earth. It's
Yeah.
not, NBD. Um, and this is why we wanted to speak with Eriel today. I believe that climate justice and climate recovery cannot be achieved without the leadership of Native and Indigenous science and solution. And she is such a leader.
Hmm.
And she is here to speak with us all about the work they are doing at the Woven Project and at Indigenous Climate Action. And she talks to us about COP30 with us that she just was at, and I believe where they launched the Woven Project.
Yeah, I
She'll
think
correct me
that's
if I'm
true.
wrong. Yeah, okay.
Right. And she literally just got back when we talked to her. Like
She had just gotten back
yeah.
by a week or so.
Yeah.
God bless her for speaking with us. That lot of jet lag and all the
Hmm.
things. But it was just so fun to get an insider's perspective on COP30, which I've never had before.
Yeah.
So thanks again so much to Eriel for taking the time to walk with us through this conversation. So let's get to it. And thanks for listening. And thank you for being here with us on this journey of reconnection and inspiration and healing and expanding into and with this incredible planet. We will see you at the takeaway. And after that, we'll see you in the spring. So please take care of yourself and your people and the sweet flora and fauna that lives with you wherever you are in the world. We're all in this together for each other. So lots of love, and we will see you soon. Eriel, welcome to Kindred, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we're really, really pleased and honored to have you. So thank you. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to introduce myself in my Indigenous language first, and then I'll do it in English. So Ekwanete, Dene Sultaneta, Eriel Tchekwie Deranger Betsi Ni Hasli. So my name is Eriel Tchekwie Deranger, and I'm a member of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, which is a Dene Sultane community located in the Treaty 8 territories of Northern Alberta. But I currently reside in Treaty 6 territory, just outside of Athabasca, also known as Edmonton, in the Enoch Cree Nations territory. And I am currently the president of Indigenous Climate Action, formerly the executive director. My role recently changed. We brought in a new executive director as I expand and build a global project under the banner of ICA. And the new project is called the Woven Project, which I launched at COP30 just last week in Belém, Brazil.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Amazing.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for that. And again, thanks so much for being here today and digging into such a critical discussion. And I know, like you said, you're based in Canada. However, climate change, climate justice, and climate action isn't a singular issue, but a global issue. And we are talking about, and what we're talking about today translates not only to Canada, but the US and around the world. And like you said, you recently were at COP30 in Belém, Brazil, which I'm sure is, it's very relevant to this conversation. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, it was very relevant to this conversation. We'll love to dig into that a little bit if we have time.
Yeah, well, you can throw it in there whenever you want. We're here for it. So, but Eriel, I'd like to start with how you came to find yourself a founding member and president, congratulations, of the organization Indigenous Climate Action, or ICA, the only Indigenous-led climate justice organization in Canada, if I'm correct.
Yes, yeah.
So talk to us about the path that led you here.
So I always say I come by this work very honestly. So I am the child of American Indian movement leaders or my parents were involved in the American Indian movement, and they met via the American Indian movement in the 70s. And my entire life was, the backdrop was political activism and advocacy for the advancement of the rights of Indigenous peoples. And this was at a time before we had things like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and at a time where Indigenous peoples were often not even being treated as humans in society. I even remember as a child in the 80s, signs still existing in stores in rural Saskatchewan that said no Indians allowed.
Wow.
And so this is a time where, like, this is the backdrop that I grew up in. And so I grew up with this political activism. I also grew up with a strong connection to land and territory. So my family are Dene Sotlene, or we're part of the Athabascan family group, which spans all the way from Alaska down into Mexico. And there are even stories that people have language groups from our community all the way into Mongolia and into South America.
Wow.
And yeah, and so I come from the Arctic area where a majority of Dene or Dene Sotlene or Athabascan language speakers live. And my family's territory was in northern Saskatchewan, which in the 70s was being explored for uranium mining. And developed for uranium mining. And this is part of the backdrop to my story. So just bear with me for a minute. This land and territory was where my dad, this was his family's traditional trap line, the trap line and territory that was allocated to our family for trapping, hunting, fishing, and to be a part of the fur trade that came into our territories at the turn of about the 17th century.
Okay.
And maybe even the 16th century. So when the fur trade came in, this was our territory for thousands and thousands of years. And they learned of this uranium exploration, and my parents and my grandfather and a couple of my aunts and uncles went out there, and they decided to occupy the land as a way to ensure that it would be protected. However, the year that I was born, our lands and territories were taken away from us, where they were appropriated illegally by a signature that they obtained somehow by a member of our family that said that they released our trap line. And my family was forcibly removed by armed security in 1979, and my family were relocated. The really interesting part of my nation is that my whole nation is a diaspora. We don't have a reserve like other communities do. And so this pushed us into different parts of Saskatchewan where we lived for a long time. And I grew up with this backdrop. But I also grew up with a strong connection to protecting our lands and our territories, the places that made us Dene or Dene Sotlene. So the word Dene, if you break down the word, we say Dene or Dene Sotlene, but Dene, if you break down the word Dene, it means to flow from the earth. And my people are called the Kaitale Dene Sotlene, which is the people of the willow, the people of the land.
That's beautiful.
And this is a big part of our identity. We are intrinsically linked to our places of origin and where we come from. And as I became older, I became a specific land claims treaty land entitlement researcher, kind of boring, but it really was the backdrop for me understanding just how much Indigenous peoples experienced deep colonial tactics of genocide and assimilation in the wave of colonization. And a lot of that was to take people away from the land, to save the man, kill the Indian, to do all of these tactics to pull us away from our culture, identities, and where we come from. And a lot of it was to appropriate our lands for industrial development. And we all know that industrial development is one of the root causes of climate change. The oil and gas era industrialization brought with it immense emissions. And so through this work, I was very politicized my whole life, and then found myself as a young person, a youth, and found myself at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues.
That's amazing. That's incredible. At such a young age, too.
I think the first time I went, I was 21, I think I was.
Amazing.
And so this was pre-UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So I got to witness the crafting and the development of the UN Dec on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And it was really quite a formidable experience. And then I found myself wondering, what was happening in my own territories, in my own people's communities. Did we have land claims? Were there things that we were fighting that I could be a part of to support? And I called up one of my cousins, and she was living in Fort McMurray, and she said, they're killing us. They're killing us. They're poisoning the water. They're destroying the lands. People are dying. And at that time, my community was experiencing rare forms of cancer that were only associated with oil and gas, like contaminants, and at a rate astronomically higher than should have been seen in a community of 1,200 people.
Right.
And she said, come home. We need your help. And I found myself pulled back to my community and realized that this is something that I needed to commit to. And for the next 10 years, in various different positions, I was working with different white environmental or NGOs like Rainforest Action Network, Greenpeace, Sierra Club. Also found myself working alongside Indigenous Environmental Network, which is an Indigenous-led environmental organization in the US, and then found myself working directly for my community. And it was in that moment that I realized, for 6.5 years, working for my community to try to talk about the injustices from these massive industrial projects, the Alberta tar sands, and the impacts on our people. And this project is one of the world's largest oil and gas projects on planet Earth. And it has devastating impacts on the ecosystems, the people, ecological health, and the climate. And over the time that I was doing this work, people kept asking me, how have you managed to bring these issues to such international accolades? Because we had Hollywood movie stars. I was being flown all over the world. We had people doing documentaries on our community. And a lot of it was that this hard work that I was putting into to raise the voice of our community from our community,
right,
not through the lens of a white environmental organization.
Big difference.
And it changed things. And over time, I kept getting more and more requests, and I realized that there was a need. And I was working with other Indigenous women in Alberta who were also facing the expansion of Alberta tar sands in their various communities. And we realized that there was a need for an Indigenous-led climate organization.
Yeah.
An Indigenous organization that could support Indigenous peoples to advance not just their plight for survival, but to advance the beautiful solutions that were coming out of our communities that were built out of the knowledge systems and the ways of being that sometimes got ignored and devalued within these structures and systems. And in 2014, 2015, I kept being like, do people want this? Is this a thing? And in 2015, a friend of mine just said, just do a gathering, bring together Indigenous peoples and see if they actually want this. And that's exactly what we did. So throughout 2015, we raised our first money, first grant to get money to hold a gathering. I did this all off the side of my desk with my full-time job, still working for my nation. And we brought together over 150 people from across so-called Canada, all Indigenous only space, to have ceremony, to share stories, to have workshops, to have guest speakers who had been within the UN system and had witnessed the crafting of the declaration, had been at the COP Rio summit in 1992, to bring together the power that we have as Indigenous peoples, and ICA was born.
Well, that is absolutely incredible. And I just want to pause for 1 second too, and just sort of, again, you mentioned 1979. I was born in 1972. So just for orienting ourselves, this to me is recent. All of what you're talking about is in play today and yesterday and not that long ago. And I think that's really, sometimes,
we forget how recent
you forget. I don't know that I forget, but that sort of like that white community perspective is like that was then and this is now. And this is why, you bringing forward these knowledge systems and this Indigenous led only space is so critical. But just to remind people, what we're talking about here is now. This is in my lifetime. This isn't back in the day, as opposed to I just think that was, and that sort of thing is just a really, it's important to sort of center us there. And so this is, and through that first job you had, that's when you became aware of sort of that the Indigenous erasure by colonialism.
Yeah, working as a land claims and specific or treaty land entitlement and specific land claims researcher with an organization called Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations, I was an archival researcher and an oral history researcher. So I got to go into the archives for Canada, Indian Affairs, but I also got to go to community and hear their stories as well. And it was, I visited, I believe, over 50 Indigenous communities in my 7 years that I worked for FSIN. And I got to listen to the stories of some of the most eldest people in the community. And I got to sort of match it to history through the eyes of the colonizers.
Right.
And it was such an interesting and eye-opening experience to sort of fill gaps in history, but also to hear and to read the blatant racism and discrimination that Indigenous peoples had to go through in order to even survive to where we are today. And I think your comment that this is part of recent history is really important. Like, my dad is a residential school survivor, and he also his English not his first language.
Right.
The same with all of my aunts and uncles.
Yeah.
And he also spent 6 years in a tuberculosis hospital where they burnt all of the records because the hospital was known through stories, because we don't have records of it, of doing medical experimentation on children.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Yep.
This is my grandfather. This isn't some distant relative.
Exactly.
This is my father.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you're
And
not old.
This is
You're
you.
not old.
This is you.
Yeah.
And
right.
and I have cousins that are 5 years older than me that also went to residential school.
Oh wow.
That this is this thing that, like, I'm the first generation to not go to residential school.
Right. This is
But some people even in your generation still did. That's the other that's the other thing that's important, is that
right.
if you've been 5 years older, that could have been you. Yeah.
Yes,
Wow.
And I
very
think
easily.
that's when this hits you it's a real time experience. And then you able to you connected the past to the present. And of course, I mean, that makes sense. This just puts you on a path of, was it a choice?
You know, there's kind of these like cheeky little sayings like being born Indigenous is to be born an activist. I don't know that that's necessarily true, because I think we do live in a world where we have choices. My siblings did not choose this path, and that I don't think that's a bad thing.
For sure.
Are they able to hold themselves in a political conversation and debate? Absolutely. But they choose to live, relatively, unfortunately, I don't want to say this to be mean to my siblings, assimilated lives. And I would say that it's not as though I am a static Indigenous person locked in some ancestral time. I'm a modern Indigenous person.
Of course not. Of course. Right. Of course. Because you exist today. You are yes, of course.
Yeah. And so I think that I will say that it's hard not to, when you are exposed to the type of information and knowledge that I was exposed to, both as a child and as a young adult, to make the choice to not heed the call of my family to come and help. It didn't feel like a choice for me.
Right.
It didn't feel like a choice for me.
Yeah.
Right. And it was your path, obviously. Yeah. So yeah.
And two things can be, multiple things can be held in one space that can all be true at the same time. So yeah, well, thank you for that. Thank you for starting us off there. Eriel, I want to switch gears a little bit, and your work focuses on empowering Indigenous people and nations, to say it generally, to lead the way on climate justice and advancing a campaign, if you will, to decolonize environmental policy. But before we get to that, it's critical to understand how colonization, both historically and institutionally, has impacted and shaped climate justice and action, particularly for Native and Indigenous leaders and communities striving and for representation and influence within government and other decision-making spaces. If we don't know or understand how colonization affects climate justice and action, we risk missing what we've been talking about, the depth and breadth of why decolonizing these spaces is so critical. So talk to us about the impact of colonization on people and the land and how it was used as a tool to reshape, marginalize, and erase Native culture, Native knowledge and science, and Indigenous governance of the land?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's very, it's a very big question as
It's
well.
a very
But
big question.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
I think that the big, a really easy way to shape this is we often think of the simplistic reductionist way to speak about the colonization of the Americas is that there was a war, the natives won, the colonizers took the land, natives people should get over it. I hear that all the time. But what's missing in that story is understanding the effects of the deeper levels of colonization, which are about the erasure and the marginalization of Native culture and ways of being, our knowledge systems, our governance, our sciences. And they didn't just take the land. A lot of Indigenous folks across the Americas and actually across the world speak to colonization as a kind of apocalypse, an end of a time in their lives where their entire worlds are ripped and torn apart and torn away from them. And this comes because Indigenous peoples globally, not just here in the Americas, but globally, have that deep interconnected relationship to place. And our identities come from place. My people, Kaitale Dene Sotlane, people of the willow, people of the land. The vast land and territories where the Dene people live in Canada is referred to as Denindeh, the land of the people. And it's where we flow from these earths, and all of our language and dialects, they change 150 kilometers around. Like you go 150 kilometers to the next community and the dialect changes just a little bit.
Yeah, right.
And the story for that is that it changes because the land changes. Those biomes and those ecosystems are just slightly different. And our language changes slightly with each change in the landscape.
Because there's different things you're living with, and it's a different ecosystem, so you have different words.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the symbiosis and the interconnected relationships that we have with place are palpable. And they shape those relationships with the natural world shaped everything from our governance systems to our education systems to our food systems to the ways in which we conserved. we were great conservationists. There were lots of rules for how much and when you should harvest,
Yeah,
and how to share those harvests. And all of this deep interconnection and relationship and kinship, because that's what it was that we had with the natural world. It wasn't that they just took the land and said, oh, sorry, you got to go live over here now. They took the land and they tried to erase and demonize that interconnected relationship. They called us heathens. They tried to, baptize us into Catholicism as a way to assimilate us into the spiritual, religious systems that were not connected to land. Right. And that was one of the most damaging pieces, because for so many of us, it wasn't just about removing us and putting us into residential schools. They were removing us from the land to remove that kinship and that relationship to place that was so strong, because our people literally fought and died to protect our lands and territories for future generations. And not just our lands and territories. We fought to protect the caribou, the bison, the moose, the waterfowl, the birds, all of these sacred relations, all of our relations that were there. A lot of our people fought to protect those. I remember just about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a poaching. We call it poaching. The government says it wasn't, because the species, or this herd of bison, which was declared diseased, was no longer under protective status. But these bison were poached by folks in the oil and gas industry. And when our hunters came upon the beheaded corpse, because that's all they wanted was the head, they cried. And they cried because this great species, this powerful animal that had such cultural reverence and also had the capacity to feed and clothe their community, was just discarded as if it was nothing. That is what colonization did. It replaced these interconnections with the ideological perspective of man's dominion over nature.
Right.
that was really put forward by things like the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius, which stated that if you came to a land and people were not of Catholic faith and Christianity, that they were not actually real humans, and that you could take the land from them, and that it was your duty to assimilate them into the word of God. And Indigenous culture is not about man's dominion over nature, but it is about that interconnected relationship.
Right.
And so with it comes different forms of conservationism, of sciences. Our Indigenous peoples were some of the most prolific wayfarers seafarers on the oceans. We have histories where there are Indigenous tribes that mapped out their own constellations and stars and had astrology.
Right.
My dad tells stories of how if you didn't do the dishes at night, or if you didn't do the dishes at the end of the day and you just left them, that the spirit would come and it had no legs and it had no arms and it would crawl all over all of the dishes and it would leave a film that would make you sick. I'm like, they understood microbiology
Right.
at a time when Western science wasn't even there yet.
Right.
And all of that was erased and devalued, and we were told that we were just nomad. That's the trope that is told is that we were nomadic people that just followed the bison blindly on the land, and we had no education, and we were backwards, and we worshipped deities and gods that weren't real. Colonization erased the power and the beauty of innovation that we had. And the reality is when they found an innovation that Indigenous peoples had that was valuable, that could be repackaged and sold, colonizers took it. This is aspirin. This is rubber. This is the baby bottle nipple. This is the syringe. This is numerous different medical treatments, suspension bridges. These are all Indigenous innovations from the Americas. Sunglasses that they're used in the north from the Inuit. These are all Indigenous innovations. And they were stolen and appropriated, and yet our people were devalued and pushed to the side and treated as if we were not human. And this, from a policy and a perspective of why it's so important to change this now, is that it wasn't until the 60s in Canada that Indigenous people even had the right to vote and participate in politics.
Right. Yeah.
The 60s, let alone participate in economic development. I'm telling you, that's only changed in the last 20 years. 30 years max.
Right.
Indigenous peoples were not allowed to obtain higher education. And if they were, it was under special circumstances where you'd have to get permission from the government to go to post-secondary school.
Yeah.
Our people were pushed to the side and treated as if it would be nothing more than subservient to system or to colonizers, that was all we had to offer. And yet, time and time again, Indigenous peoples tended to blow those sort of limitations out of the water, where we saw Indigenous peoples learn to read, write, become some of the best agricultural farmers on the lands, harvesters, and participate in these systems at a level of a depth that some of the folks from European settlers couldn't even match. And so it's just really important to understand that we did not, as Indigenous peoples, we did not, and we were not a part of setting the tone for the industrialization of the Americas that brought with it the systems of extractivism and ecosystem annihilations that have lent us to where we are, to being in the climate crisis.
Right.
And if we really truly want to be talking about real actionable climate solutions, strategies and policies, we have to start back at the history that allowed humanity to believe that this land was ours for the taking and the destroying. And we need to begin the process of decolonizing our minds, our bodies, and our spirits to be able to develop true policies and strategies that are rooted back in that interconnectedness relationship that we now know is confirmed by science to be true and real.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so, to me, what the thing you said about colonization, putting the persons, people are always at the top, and it's as though this is a buffet, as somebody said to us recently, and you get to pick and choose what you want, and the rest doesn't matter. That struck me because that's what I have always loved when we talk to Indigenous people, is that idea of we are brothers with the animals, or sisters, and the land and the plants, and like the reverence that you show to not taking more than you need, and that there's, like you said, there's a lot of rules that make it so it's sustainable. And I think that's so critical, because that's I don't think it has to get more complicated than that. When we just think this is a buffet, the world is a buffet for us to take whatever we want, it's not sustainable. It's
Well,
just that.
that's so right, Jen. And I think too, like, all right, what you're saying about kinship, it's the animals and the people embedded together.
Right.
You can't separate the natural world from people, from all people. It's just who doesn't know that anymore, and then uses that as a weapon in that way. And it's like this, and also just to say again, like, science and knowledge embedded into these stories. This wasn't like story time, bedtime.
Yes.
This is passing down critical science knowledge, critical life knowledge, all of these things in just a different way. And this is where that's it's this kinship, and I love that word so much. And I think this is when now we talk about decolonizing, right? So let's get into decolonizing environmental policies, and how that process, or the effects of this process, can be a way to restore and heal our environments. And to be clear, when I talk about decolonizing in the context of climate and environmental challenges, I'm not only referring to Indigenous communities. That's not who I'm talking to. I'm speaking to and including broader systems that shape global environmental decision making, particularly Western worldviews and scientific Western approaches. So, how does decolonizing environmental policy affect climate action and climate recovery?
Yeah, I think that this is really, I think you hit on something really important that I just don't want to gloss over, is decolonization doesn't just belong to those that have been colonized.
Right.
Because the reality is that the colonizers that came here at some point were probably colonized somewhere else.
Yes.
And this severing of our relationship and interconnections with the natural world is part of human nature. I mean, even the way in which Western science looks at the impacts of climate, and even how we talk about the Anthropocene, which is human impacts on the earth, as if humans are somehow not a part of the earth.
Right.
It's a weird hypocrisy, irony that I can't really,
Yes.
I don't know where it fits in these systems. But I mean, at least we can map out human impacts on the earth. But the reality is we are also impacting ourselves.
Right.
And decolonization is a process that belongs to everyone. And that we need to decolonize our minds and move ourselves away from these systems of man's dominion over.
Yeah.
Systems that if we don't abide by one rule and one God, or we abide by one system, this is white supremacy in its formation. And white supremacy, also need to state, is not about skin color. This is not about skin color.
Mhm.
White supremacy is a system.
Mhm.
It's a system of being in the world, of domination over others, having a higher regard. And humans, we do this all the time in the natural world. And I think that decolonization and is something that we all have to be participating in. How are we looking at where Western systems and structures have limitations? Because that's the reality. It's not as if everything that came with Western culture, like as far as like science and medicine, these are good things. It's not like the people brought really good things with them. I want to state that.
No, for sure.
But colonization and white supremacy and the ideological values that brought colonization were the things that were so harmful.
Right.
To believe
that's a really
that
great differentiation. Yes.
There's really important to understand that white supremacy, to believe that one race is more important or smarter than or better than another, is so inherently harmful. And these systems of ideological perspectives that came and permeated the Americas and much of the world, those are the problem. But there are certain aspects of where we talk about weaving Western and Indigenous knowledges together, and that's been done really successfully. But what I have also witnessed is that there are very there are very fine limitations to Western science and systems because they cannot move beyond this idea of man's dominion over and control over the natural world. And this is where Indigenous scientific approaches really are quite magical because they hold space for what doesn't exist within Western science. And that's relationship and kinship, which you cannot measure with empirical scientific data.
Yeah.
You can't measure that.
Yeah. So can you give me an example of what you're saying? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And I'll just say too, like it's like you talked about this when we spoke before. It's getting creative. There's this creativity that you need to bring. But give me an example of what that looks like.
So I'm going to tell the story, and I've forgotten her name, and I apologize. But there is an Indigenous ethnobotanist who specialized in seeds in Eastern Canada.
Okay.
And I believe she's Haudenosaunee. And so she was working in a lab, and they were gifted some ancient seeds that were like early contact seeds that had been preserved in a clay pod.
Wow.
And they took them into the lab, and they wanted to see if they could yield these seeds. And this Indigenous woman became very curious because she hadn't seen these seeds. And she went actually to her community at the same time that they were doing experiments on the lab and these seeds to ask people if they had knowledge of these seeds. And some of them said, oh, there are stories of these seeds. And she said, well, what did we do? How did we grow these seeds? And they didn't know the songs because they'd lost them because of colonization and residential schools and all of that stuff. But they knew stories that they would sing to the seeds. They knew that they planted them after like a certain number of days after the full moon, and that they would plant them with certain other types of I guess spirit. I don't know how else to say it, but with love, and you couldn't ever like think bad things, and you had to hold your spirit in a certain way. And so she yielded the seeds in the lab, and lo and behold, they grew and was, I don't know, I'm going to make up a number, 40%. Okay. And they were like very impressed with like, oh yeah, we got these seeds to yield with the, this pH level of the soil, this much water, this much light. And she decided she wanted to go on her own journey. And she wanted to learn other seed songs. And so she learned seed songs similar to the seeds that they had received. And when she then like prayed on this and did some ceremony around it and learned new songs for these seeds. And she went into the lab and she still practiced everything that they said, but she still kept the pH level. She kept it contained in the same level. But what she did is she sang to them every day. She planted them on like the third day after the full moon or whatever the rule was. And the seeds that she planted in this way yielded twice as much as the seeds that they had yielded with just using the same techniques. And this is this beautiful thing where it became less around, let's watch this seed and plant it and watch it grow because we know the exact pH levels and all of these things that yield this type of seed, and let's see if we can do it. But it created a kinship with that plant. It created a relationship with that plant. And suddenly the plant yielded better. And people are just like, well, that's hearsay, that's anecdotal. Sure, she did it again. And they did it again. And every single time when they did the singing and the way that they planted, it changed the yield of the plant. We've also seen the stories where the Japanese water scientist talks about saying bad words and kind words to water. We've seen these things. And we've also seen how human relationships and interactions with the natural world can affect policy. And this is where I'm going to tell you this story. So we often perceive environment as an externality. And we bring in all of these Western scientists. So in my region, we were doing a surface water quantity and quality assessment and redoing the whole design for the lower Athabasca region. And they brought in all the specialist hydrologists, conservationists. They had stakeholder meetings. They did all this testing. And they're just like, okay, so we've decided what is considered an ecological base flow is what's necessary to keep the ecology healthy and happy and all of the stakeholders happy. And they came to our community and they said, what do you think of this? Because they have to now because of law changes and consultation. And our elders and our knowledge holders were like, well, we don't know what any of this means. Like, this means nothing to us. You're saying ecological base flow and a flow rate of 187 meters per second. Right. I don't know. What is that? What is that? Right. And so they said, okay, well, we'll take you out to the river and we'll show you that you'll still be able to access your fishing grounds and your trapping grounds and your cabins, and you'll all be happy. They took us out there. They took them out there. And one of the land users said, what happens if I put a bull moose in a big male moose that he harvests into the boat? Can I still get through the river system? And they're like, oh, well, we didn't test for that. And then they were like, he's like, what if I get two bull moose? And so they said, well, we didn't test for that. And they put the weight of two male moose into a boat and they tried to traverse, and lo and behold, they could not. And what happened is they had to reevaluate what would be considered an ecological base flow for the river if they included human interactions, including harvesting. And so when you have the relationships of human interactions with the natural world, it changes and accelerates the protections of the ecosystem because of human use. We are not a blight on the planet when we have relationship with it.
Right.
We actually can increase it. And what happened was they created something called the Aboriginal extreme flow rate, which was twice as high as the ecological base flow.
Incredible.
And we can see how Indigenous knowledge, science, and relationship can change policy. Additionally, I also want to state that our science, like Indigenous science, is science, because when you break down science, science is about experimentation, observation, and conclusions, and hypotheses and conclusions. And Indigenous peoples have been living in relationship with ecosystems and have had the longest case studies of ecosystems than any other hydrologist or ecologist.
Right. It's this evolving and this connected with, continuity, the continuity and the length of time spent immersed and steeped. And, when you were talking about singing to the seeds, I was thinking about like physics. Like I was thinking about like frequency and a little off, but people have like put sensors on mushrooms and they make these sounds, and just like there's a frequency in there. This is again like, is that physics? What I would call physics. Like what is happening? The energy, right? There's an energy that is translated between and among us. And I think again, this is back to the science embedded in the historical continuity of the Indigenous experience.
Yes. And the creativity that comes from that too, because we live in a society where our worth is measured on how much we can produce into a world. We are driven by productivity. Productivity bias is one of the tenets of systems of white supremacy. And indigeneity and Indigenous cultures is about experience. It's about having those relationships with the land. The most revered and respected people are those that have the most deepest intimate relationships with land and place, that have the ability to tell and transmit stories and knowledge from the land that others don't. It is not determined by how many letters you have before and after your name, but by the relationships that you have, the understanding, the intimate understanding of our plant medicines and our knowledge. And those, they talk about it as like as a language. So it's not like a language we speak from our mouths. It's a language we speak with our spirit, and that relationship and kinship is in that relationship. And I tell this story all the time because as 5 or 6 years old, my dad was teaching us how to trap in the winter. And I was walking behind him and I'm asking him a million questions. And he keeps being like, shh, be quiet, listen. I'm like, stop. And I try to listen. And I'm like, I don't know what he's telling me to listen to. And I start asking questions again. And he's just like, shh, listen. And I don't understand. And so I stop and I remember listening. And all of a sudden I'm listening to the snow under my feet. I'm listening to the wind blow, but I still don't know what I'm listening to. And then later we're walking across a body of water. And I got scared because I said because it was early spring. And I said to my dad, how do you know we're not going to fall through the ice? And my dad said, you can tell by the way the snow sounds under your feet. And these are these intimate languages that the land speaks to us.
Right.
And the land speaks to us and teaches us things, but we have forgotten how to listen. And instead, we create Western systems of science that try to control all of nature to find those same answers that our ancestors and my parents and that I was taught as a child to just learn how to listen to through experimentation and through relationship with land.
Yes, intimacy and listening. That and time spent.
Experience. Yeah.
Yes. Like hundreds and thousands of years of experience. You didn't just figure this out, in 2 weeks ago, right? In a lab
Yeah.
type idea. And I think
And
that's
my
where that's so it's the depth of experience. And this is what we're kind of talking about, like the depth of experience and then taking it to a place like COP30. Let's talk about that for a second, right? So like you're in Belém, Brazil. I'm curious who was there, who was asked to be there. Well, there's other things, but it's like this is where I think about leaders in environmental spaces and then like again, COP, right? I mean, wow. And you were just there.
Yeah. I think that this is really important, especially when we talk about decolonizing climate policy and finding climate solutions, is that the Conference of the Parties, and this is one of my mentors, Tom Goldtooth from Indigenous Environmental said, is that we should start calling it Conference of the Perpetrators, is where global leaders, global colonial leaders come together to try to come to agreements on how to tackle the climate crisis. And what is really frustrating is that we have stat after stat now really, really hammering home that Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous sciences have a place in these conversations, in the solutions pathways forward, in driving home policies and strategies that can benefit everybody. Indigenous peoples, they manage customarily or traditionally and illegally in some places up to 26% of the world's land surface, which for relation, urban centers, all urban centers across the whole earth take up about 3 to 4% of the land surface. So like over 5 times more of the land surface is managed by Indigenous peoples. And these lands and territories represent a vast majority, between 60 and 80% of the world's biodiversity. And when Indigenous peoples have control, which is a very nascent, or not, it's a nascent term because we don't control relationship with our lands and territories,
Right.
that is undisturbed.
Yeah.
That this leads to healthier lifestyles, better stabilized economies. Like there's study after study that shows this, and we're more apt to say no to promises of economic benefit for the destruction of those ecosystems and lands and territories.
Yeah.
And yet in these spaces at COP, because we are colonized peoples that don't have ownership over land, we are observers and stakeholders, where we have no say in the actual negotiations themselves. Yet we are driving some of the most powerful climate solutions, where we are safeguarding up to 80% of the world's biodiversity, managing 26% of the world's land mass, and driving solutions that are being co-opted and appropriated by our colonizers and repackaged and perverted into creating capitalistic structures of carbon trading mechanisms, conservation offset systems, where they're buying and trading biodiverse lands and territories that were managed by Indigenous peoples for the last millennia or millennias. And so we have this really backward system, where this COP in particular, one of the first COPs to be held in the Amazon, and was supposed to be branded as the Indigenous COP, yet thousands and thousands of Indigenous peoples from Brazil were denied entry into the space and denied access to speak with world leaders to talk about not only their plight, but also their solutions. And so we have to, and this is where like the idea of decolonizing not just our minds and our bodies, but decolonizing our systems becomes important.
Well,
Who
and
are the decision makers?
Right. And I'll pause here, because what happened? Tell us what happened at COP, where they weren't invited. So
they weren't invited into the space, and thousands of Indigenous peoples protested and broke down the front doors. This is the first time in history that the security was breached to the point that people entered into the space without accreditation. They staged numerous protests outside of the gates of the COP30 entrance in what's called the Blue Zone. And there were many, many protests held almost every day.
Yep.
And what's really, really alarming is while these meetings were happening, an Indigenous land defender in Brazil, in one of the communities that was trying to stop a project from destroying his lands and territories, was murdered for defending his lands and territories. And what I want to state is that this is not some like anecdotal activist protester.
Right.
thing. Like, there is quantifiable evidence that Indigenous land defense is actually mitigating and avoiding emissions, and that we are not actively holding respect or reverence, or giving the sort of accolades that are due to Indigenous land defenders for protecting ecosystems. Because Indigenous Climate Action, Indigenous Environmental Network, and Oil Change International did a study in early 2021, I believe, that looked at Indigenous land defense just in North America, and not all of them, just the biggest profile ones. And they found that if all of those land defense movements were victorious, this included things like the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL and all of these things, that if all of these projects were successful, that it would equal 26% of the combined annual emissions of the United States and Canada combined.
Wow.
26% would be avoided and mitigated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but instead of supporting Indigenous land defenders, we criminalize them, and they're the most likely to be murdered for defense of their lands and territories. And so there's a real polarity that's happening here, where we think that we're ahead. We're like, it's 2025, colonization happened so long ago. All of that happened a long time ago. It's still happening today in 2025, where Indigenous land defenders are murdered. Indigenous land defenders here in Canada were just sentenced and criminalized for protecting their lands and territories last month in the Wet'suwet'en territories in British Columbia. And we see this time and time again.
Yeah. And I think
the reality is, go ahead.
No, go. I just was going to say, I think this is where it's really important. People will say, well, what is standing in the way of Indigenous science leading, go to COP, do these things? That's the answer. That's an anecdote or an example of that answer. And I think that's where, again, we need to bring this into the very present, very real moment today. This is happening now. And I think that's where, looking at COP30, and so how did it go this year? Well, it went the same as it goes a lot of years. And I think that's where this is so critical to be speaking with you and hearing these perspectives that are in very real time.
This is the 30th COP 30.
Yeah.
And it's been over 30 years, but emissions have not declined.
Mm-hmm.
There have been no real meaningful solutions to address the climate crisis, and it's just business as usual.
Yeah.
And the conversations continue to be locked in a capitalist economic discussion, as opposed to a discussion to save life on this earth. Yeah. And so this is why decolonization becomes so incredibly important. If we've been meeting for 30 years and we can't get it right, there's something wrong with the systems, and we need transformative systemic change, and it needs to be guided not by human-centric values, but by kinship and relationship with the natural world.
Right. And you're talking about this is what needs to change in climate recovery. And this kinship is so critical. Thank you for finishing that. That's a beautiful way to sum that up. Now, I just want to go back for a second, because you told that really, I can see you and your dad out there, and you're just and he's like, daughter, please just, okay, we used to tell one of my nieces, how about you just think your thoughts for a little while? And let's just, but super, super cute. What it did make me think about is the listening part.
Me too. Same thing. Like, there's nothing to listen to. It's silent. What do you mean listen? It's quiet out here.
Yeah, there's so much to listen to that this space offers us all the time, and it just takes walking out there. So while researching and sitting with this subject, one voice kept coming into my thoughts, and it was the voice of the land. And the questions that keep arising are, what does the land want? What is the land asking for? And I ask this because, here's the land is a living and evolving, and there's a deep continuity between us and the land. But I'm thinking about its needs today are possibly not the same as they were centuries ago. So from your perspective, what do you think the land is asking for, and who is listening?
I think that it's very clear. We just sort of going back to COP for a minute. It was very it was tragic. There was a fire in the blue zone.
Oh,
Fortunately, no one was
yes.
hurt.
I saw that.
Um,
Okay.
but just the day before, there was flooding in the blue zone, and the oceans pavilion flooded. And the
Wow.
pavilion that started on fire was the India pavilion, where they're seeing record-breaking temperatures and the oceans are rising. And it was such
Ooh,
a
I just got
interest.
chills. I just got chills, actually.
And
Sorry.
there's a beautiful Ponca Indigenous elder, Casey Hornick Camp, who talks about how, like, we are nature defending itself, and nature has all of the answers if we just learn how to listen. And so I think that what does the land want? What is the land asking for? And who is listening? Is, I think it's been very clear. Casey Camp refers to the rising temperatures as like when we have an infection in our body, what happens? The temperatures of our body rises, and we have a fever to try to push the illness out. And we also will get all snotty and mucousy, and the ocean levels are rising. And the earth is a living ecosystem, and it's sending us very clear messages that it is sick, that it is out of balance. And I think you're absolutely right that it's not the same as it was centuries ago. A lot of our knowledge systems no longer applicable to our lands and territories. And that's real. And it also comes with a heavy amount of grief for our people to not be able to know what those cycles are for our species, for our relatives. Yeah. Whether those are plants or rivers or large migratory animals on the land or migratory birds in the sky.
Right.
And there's a prophecy that during the last ice age, when people saw the changes on the land, there was a call for a great council. And the great council was to bring people together to share their knowledge of the water, the seeds, growing food, shelters to survive. Because we don't have knowledge that is all encompassing as Indigenous peoples, as any peoples. And the land teaches us different things, and we have to learn how to listen to it, but it doesn't mean that it will always stay that way. And it was prophesied at that time that they shared all that knowledge to survive the Ice Age. And it was prophesied at that time that there would be another time in the future where the land would once again change. And the changes would be so vast and so massive that once again, we would have to call a great council of all people of all four corners of the world this time to share our knowledge of all the listening we've done, the seeds, the plants, of the medicines, to share those knowledges, to be able to survive those pending changes on the land. And we are in that time. And as Indigenous peoples, because we have this recent history of that connection and relationship, a lot of our people are listening, and some of them aren't. I really want to make sure I say this, that there is this over romanticization of Indigenous peoples, that if you are Indigenous, that you come like ready made with that deep interconnected relationship and that reverence and spirituality. Yep. But assimilation and colonization really worked. It really worked. It has its hold on many of our people. And not every single Indigenous person has that knowledge, but they have it closer in their spirit than some people that have had that separation for much longer. And we fortunately have a lot of leaders in our community that have maintained those teachings and those relationships. And I am fortunate. I'm incredibly fortunate to have been able to have been raised partially on the land, partially in the urban centers, and to know what both worlds are, to understand Western science and Indigenous science and knowledge systems. And it is those people, our elders, that have that intimate relationship that is being transmitted through cultural revitalization in our communities. And we're starting to see that come, and it's different. And I love it.
Yeah.
It's not static and locked in something from the 1600s.
Right.
It's new.
Like alive. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And it's evolving and changing. And it's those that continue to maintain those relationships that understand, not just from an empirical science data way that we're all a part of a living ecosystem, but through that experiential learning and understanding of place. And language is such a powerful catalyst of culture and understanding of the land. And I said at the beginning, like dene is to flow from the earth, but there are so many words. Indigenous languages almost across the globe are verb-based languages. They're about doing, as opposed to noun-based languages, which see things as static and locked in time. And so those verb-based languages are about being in relationship with things. Like the word for strawberry pie in Anishinaabe is like a really long sentence. The sentence is like to find the wheat and to grind it up and to put it into a thing and find the strawberries. And it's this long sentence because it's a verb.
It's like an explanation. It's an explanation, and that just is that word, right? I think that's,
And so the language teaches just as much as being on the land. And so there's these beautiful things. And what is the land asking for? There's this whole movement. We call it, Indigenous peoples call it land back. And the problem is under the colonial sort of white supremacist ideologies, it's about ownership of, control of. But land back is just as much about the land is calling us back to it. It is calling us back to the land to remember who we are, to remember our relationship and our kinship with those lands and territories, and to restore those relationships. And the climate crisis isn't just about trying to balance the GHGs in the atmosphere. It is about how we need to rebalance and restore our relationships with the entire living world. The land is calling us back to restore those relationships with it, to restore those kinships, and to restore the language that so many of us have forgotten how to listen to and understand.
We're already talking about this. However, we always end our episodes with the same question, and that is, why is this conversation so important? And I would say also, what action can we take from what we have talked about today?
Well, I think it's so important because we're at the precipice of climate collapse, and we need we need to do everything we can all at once. And so working towards decolonization and moving beyond the systems and limitations of colonial structures and leaning into ancestral wisdom and knowledge allows us the space to get creative and think outside of the box. And I love that. And I think that that's why this is so important, because obviously the box has been so narrow and it's gotten us in trouble.
Not working. It's not working.
It's not working.
Right. Yeah.
It's not working.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's why this is so important, is that we need to be trying to do things differently. And this offers a really, really defined way to do that. Like there's actual substantial data to prove that this is a viable solution and move forward. And I'm not saying we abandon technology and science at all. I'm just saying we need to expand the room.
Like you said, we're not trying to go back to an old way because we're living now. So it's like just the getting creative is so huge. And I think that it scares a lot of scientists, I think, or people, not necessarily scientists. It scares the powers that be, I think. Creativity sounds dangerous to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well,
distribution. What's the word? Distribution of power. Right.
Yes.
That's when people get real freaked out. It's like, okay, well, wow, I'm sorry that feels bad for you.
I mean, that says something about the person if they aren't willing to sort of let go.
And the institution also.
Yeah. And, I recently heard on another podcast that one of the biggest killers of creativity is productivity. So we need time to not be locked in systems of productivity. We need the time to sit and integrate and feel.
I mean, even as children, you think of things like the Montessori way of educating kids, or the Waldorf, where they need to be outside and they need to have fresh air and they need to have time to play in a mud puddle, things like that. Exactly what you're saying. It's like it's not new anywhere, but it's just like
experiential, not
kids.
productivity.
That's not for big people. That's just for little people.
But it's for all people.
I know. I agree.
Right. Yeah.
And so we need to slow down and hurry up, which is the scariest part of this. Is we need to slow down and hurry up and learn how to listen. And learn how to find a way to sort of unlock ourselves or untether ourselves from a system that is destroying itself. And so what actions can we take? That was the second question. I think that part of it is that we need Indigenous peoples particularly need space to build our structures up and the power back, and that requires redistribution of resources, power that needs to create the space for us so that we can come into the space and sit with you as equals. I think like there's a Haudenosaunee chief from Akwesasne, which is Eastern Canada, United States, said that if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, and we don't want to be on the menu anymore. And so, first things first, learn about the Indigenous peoples where you live. We exist everywhere. There's a really great resource, I believe it's called Native Lands.
Yep, we know it.
Yeah, and you
at
can
least
check.
In the U.S. we do. We know the one here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same one. You can use it.
Okay.
You can use it anywhere in the world.
Okay.
And you can map out who those Indigenous peoples are, where you are, and it's a really great resource to just sort of start. Learn about the history.
Have that. We'll put that link in the show notes too, because it's really incredible.
You can learn about the history of Indigenous peoples, the real history, because the history that we're often taught is not the real history. And learning about Indigenous innovations in sciences and the incredible work of so many Indigenous scholars like Jessica Hernandez and Robin Wall Kimmerer, who are both ethnobotanists and scientists that draw on Indigenous ancestral knowledge and blend it with Western science. But I think what we need is some time and capacity for Indigenous peoples to blend and weave our Indigenous knowledges together. And at the beginning of the show, I talked about a new project that I'm building, and that's just that. We need the space for Indigenous peoples to weave our ideas together and build the strength and resiliency of our communities. Those Indigenous-only spaces at the beginning of ICA are so important to building the power of our communities back. And so while I love that non-Indigenous folks want to work with us, I think you also need to be supporting Indigenous-only spaces for us to build up our resiliency, to be able to build up our power, to heal together, to be able to come and let go of some of those angers and frustrations and really step into our power as Indigenous peoples globally, because we have a type of kinship and relation that stems from our cosmological, ideological perspectives of our interconnections and kinship of our lands and territories that has never been broken.
And when we
weave those things together, we can have, when we come to the table, we are able to sit there with power and integrity. But it also needs to be supported and respected by our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters. But this is not about power over. This is about being able to come together as equals at the table. And so this is so important, is supporting Indigenous peoples to have those Indigenous-only spaces and not be offended by them, and still invite them in to your spaces and think about how to redistribute power, wealth, access to decision-making spaces, and how do we move from dominion over to power with, to dominion over to relationships with. These are the most important aspects that we need to be moving forward for climate recovery, for addressing the climate crisis from a justice perspective. Climate justice isn't just about reducing GHGs in the atmosphere and stabilizing economic systems. It's about addressing historical wrongs. It's about healing from our past and moving forward for a future that's not going to just benefit us in this generation, but will benefit the 7 generations into the future.
So Eriel, thank you with the deepest respect and gratitude. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your perspective and your science and your knowledge. And we really look to you and actually following you. I'm thinking, where can we follow you and continue to watch your work?
Yeah, so you can check me out. Thank you again. First, thank you so much, Masicho, in my language, for inviting me into the show. You can check out Indigenous Climate Action, which is based just in so-called Canada, which is www.indigenousclimateaction.com. And you can also check out the international project that, again, was just launched last week. We're very, very new. It's called The Woven Project, and it's www.thewovenproject.org. And it is connected to Indigenous Climate Action. I'm also on all the socials. You can just search my name, Eriel Dernager, LinkedIn, all the socials out
Okay.
there doing all the things.
That's great. Oh, great. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much. It was such a joy to speak with you, and thanks so much. We really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the takeaway. Woo, girl, what a powerful conversation. And I think what I guess my overall takeaway is that kindred aligns to the idea or belief, whatever you want to call it, that without Indigenous science and leadership, that the earth will not be able to heal, and we won't find, in regards to climate action and climate solutions and climate recovery, it is critical that we have Indigenous science and leadership.
And I might even go as far to say that with it, I think we can heal. I don't think healing is impossible. That's the thing. It's like with, I would say, new ideas, but they're not new ideas. With
right.
Old ideas coming back and being re-implemented. That's the thing that I feel like is the truth that I've discovered through doing this is we are able to. We have tools to do that. It's just going to be looking at things in a different way than we're used to in the Western patriarchal way. And that's even more exciting to me than we can't do it without them, but we actually can do it. I feel like that's really true. I really believe that.
I agree. I think if we follow their lead, it will happen.
Can do a lot of repair.
And one thing I thought a lot about, because I do this in my own life. I have a lot, but this is why I titled this "Listening to the Land." Who's the best at listening and interpreting?
Right.
And I don't know that. I don't think that's me. I think that's someone, and it's not that I can't be a part of that. Should be a part of that. We're all in this together, and yet it really is who has held this knowledge for millennia, who has not been separate from that experience and knowledge for millennia.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I deeply believe that. And so I think if there's new ideas you haven't heard, dig into them, research them, look into them. I think this is a two listen episode. I've listened to it 3 times and gotten so much out of each time. And I think these conversations are so critical. And I'm deeply appreciative to Eriel for joining us and walking us through this conversation. I will continue to look to her and others who are working so hard and have a very specific tool set, skill set.
Yes.
So definitely check out indigenousclimateaction.com too, because there's a lot of really great resources there. They have their about page, what's new, what they do, take action, and then a lot of really good notes on COP30. And of course, you can check our show notes for all the links, for sure. Dig into this. And we're really grateful. So thank you, Eriel, so much for joining us today and having this conversation. This is our last episode of season 9, our winter season. We will be back in April. We'll be back with season 10 with extra bells on, because season 10, that's a big deal. That's a whole decade in podcasting world. That's 10. 10's a big number.
Mm-hmm. Double digits. Yeah.
Double digits. Oh my gosh, we're preteens now?
That's right, basically.
Wow, amazing. Double digits. Yeah. And just, while we're away, we're always on Instagram. Sign up for our newsletter via the podcast. Via the our website, kindredpodcast.co, and keep up to date and all the deets. And when season 10 will drop, we are not going anywhere. We're just not going to be dropping new episodes, but we will in April, like I said. In the meantime, we'll be doing different conversations and archived episodes and all the rest. We will be continuing our Kindred Plus content. So if you want to become a member of the Kindred community, you can sign up on Apple Podcasts and become subscribers. That would be amazing. And that's a monthly new content whole thing. So that's always really fun.
Yeah.
And so deep bow to all of our guests. What a really fun, interesting, inspirational season. This was really, really great. It's my favorite season, of course.
Yeah, right.
Which I say every season. But it always just, I don't know, it just gets better and better.
Yeah, and there, if people are new and haven't heard all the other seasons, there's some real gold back there. Go back in the archives and check some out. There's a lot of great human beings that we've been blessed to talk to. Somebody the other day asked me, if I haven't listened to anything, where should I start? And it's a tough one to answer, but go see what strikes your fancy.
Right.
And,
that's what I tell people too. Just scroll through and see what the topics are.
Yeah.
Read the descriptions.
Exactly.
I think that's a really great way.
Yeah.
I mean, the podcast I love the most, sometimes I do that too. Like not every single, I think every single one of our guests are great. And
me too.
Some will resonate deeper with
exactly.
others. So,
but there's lots to listen to.
There is, yes. Thank you for that. That is very, very true. So, as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and break for squirrels.
Feed the birds.
Feed the birds.
Cold and snowy out there. Yeah.
Yes, we are a big
Put
storm
fresh
is heading
water
our
out
way.
for your animals because everything's frozen. All these things.
Yes, for sure. Maybe go buy some really hard corn for the deer, you know.
Right.
Yeah. And thank you so much for listening and supporting, and we love you very much. And Jenny, I'll see you hopefully before the spring.
I think you will. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Very good,
Much
everyone.
love, everyone.
Lots of love. Kindred is hosted by me and my sister Jen, produced by Kat Gaddy and myself, sound production and editing by Dan Cooper, original music by Ellie Grace, and our Kindred artwork was created by Lindsay Coffin. Please follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and feel free to contact us through our website at kindredpodcast.co, where you can also find details about Kindred Plus, our subscription service, as well as links to our social media accounts and show notes.